Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. It is going to be a special one today. Our guest, Paolo Sironi, is going to just have a wonderful way to express our connectedness, his explorations, and you won't want to miss it. In the meantime, I want to invite you to visit planetarycitizens.net. There's some free books you can download there, specifically Planetary Citizens, Awakening the Heart of Humanity. It will change the way you look at the world and yourself. And also, do please comment, like, share, subscribe. It makes all the difference in the world. And trust me, your comments will be responded to. You don't want to miss this episode. Please stick around and listen. It's going to be great. So, Paolo, a little bit about him. He is a fintech and banking thought leader, author of Quantum Sapiens, and the global research leader for banking and financial markets at IBM's Institute of Business Value. His work connects quantitative finance, technological innovation, platform business models, and more recently, questions around AI and consciousness. So stick around. You're going to definitely enjoy this conversation. We'll be right back. Paolo,
Yeah.
it is so great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this, especially with your work with Quantum Sapiens. It kind of aligns with what I've been studying for a long time, and particularly with Barbara Marx Hubbard's work in the Homo Universalis concept that she's presented. So, pleasure to have you here. I know this is going to be great. Thank you.
The pleasure is mine. Grazie mille.
Grazie. So, in the beginning, in the beginning, right? We're going to start off with the story, right? How did you, because of how we investigate inner and outer experiences to begin with on this channel podcast, when did you first recognize that there was more to the world than what you were being told? And what kind of experience was that? How did it show you that there was more? What was that like? And how did you see that amongst your peers or friends at the time?
Well, mine is, I guess, very different than an emotional or a perceptual experience. I just discovered that the way I was presented, some aspects of reality did not square. Started from the basics that you study, especially at university where I graduated in financial markets. So it sounds strange to you, maybe, that I
Mm.
connect financial markets and consciousness. But I stumbled onto the consciousness story sort of by fortune or misfortune. So essentially, when I graduated in financial markets, I remember that I was told the concept of information asymmetry. And the information asymmetry idea in banking is that some know more than others about the future using quantitative methods for predictions.
Hmm.
And I could not really understand why I did not understand it until I realized that I did not understand it because it was wrong. Essentially,
It just didn't make sense.
It didn't make any sense. So the future
Right.
is open, cannot be predicted with data. The data that we have at our disposal are always an imperfect representation of reality, and we're all constrained to measure things that sometimes can't be fully measured. This
Sure.
is a consequence of the Age of Enlightenment and the French Revolution. The idea that everything can be measured. If it can be measured, it doesn't matter. In reality, there's much more that matters that can be
Absolutely.
measured.
And you just mentioned something about and verified that it just didn't make sense.
They don't make
That's a,
sense.
that's a visceral
I really had a
experience. It's
problem of
not
measurement.
quantitative,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So I started with the problem of measurement as it is, right? So I felt that there was something missing. And and that's the idea of the asymmetry of information, right? In
Hmm.
financial markets. In reality, it's a make-believe. This is an industry, if you invest your money, where few pretend to know too much about the future, they know nothing, like everybody else. And most of us are concerned we don't know enough. We know enough to be cautious when we, encounter their investment propositions. But as that was my starting point, I started investigating, why that cannot work. What makes information incomplete? So essentially, I
Hmm.
became a quantitative risk manager. So uh, a quant
I love that term,
writing and managing financial
quantitative
models.
explanator.
Yeah, exactly. So like you get formula, you get data, you try to explain and represent, but those
Sure.
models were always models, were not
Right.
reality. So everybody in the industry was confusing the fact that their models were just quantitative, reality was something else. A, that all the data was available. B, in any case, there was something beyond the data that could not be available. In a
Right.
sense, financial
Right.
markets are not just collection of data, it's also a network of emotions, intentions, aspirations that cannot be framed inside a quantitative framework. So it's a very complex system. Not as
Hmm.
complex as consciousness, but essentially there are some parallels here. So then I started delving into the difference between risk and fundamental uncertainty. So risk management that all quant people do around the world is just a faint reflection, right? So it's like a Photoshop picture of a distant reality, but it's never that reality. So in my work, I used to say, I'm not here to tell you the truth about the future, but to contradict what I know, knowing that not everything I know. That was very provocative in banking,
Great to
right? So I was,
question yourself, right?
yeah, I was entering this meeting with the CEO of the bank saying, this is the value at risk. What are the measures that get calculated by quantitative risk managers? And I
Hmm.
was saying, and it is wrong. And they were saying, what do you mean it's wrong? Well, it's wrong because it's based upon the data I know, but there's much more I don't know. And it will be rich or poor according to what I cannot measure, not what I can measure. So for
Right.
me, risk management was not the measurement. It's risk management. Risk management is a process of consciousness. That means we need to be aware that there's more that we pretend to compress inside the quantitative model that seems to be very elegant and sometimes is, even highly sophisticated, but will always be partial, will always be disconnected from the real reality. So then I had to investigate, what was the source of this gap. And that's when I leaned into something that pointed straight into the consciousness discussion. So all that financial markets are is about a fundamental uncertainty, which is the structure of the market, the future
Hmm.
is open, and time, because you invest through time, right?
Right.
But
Right.
irreversible time and fundamental uncertainty are also two determinants of the intensity of consciousness. So while I was studying financial markets, I figured out that I was into a field of research that was also unveiling some of the important elements that would characterize the extraordinary intensity of human consciousness. And I say human consciousness because I don't know if there will be different consciousness elements in the world or in the universe,
Right.
right? So, but I know that the one they were looking at and I know while many investigate the origins, I'm not so deep or inspired to discuss the origin of itself, but I can discuss the intensity. So after 20 years of researching financial markets and building this new axiology of financial markets based on the biological macro foundations being
Hmm.
irreversible time and fundamental uncertainty, I defined the real axiology value in financial services to be the augmentations of people consciousness in their financial life. right? So
Sure.
here am I
Sure.
saying, and I call it conscious banking.
And that depends on the perspective of which you mentioned the Photoshop picture, right? How you see that is going to
Oh,
be
yes,
determined by your perspective,
yes,
which
yes.
manages your perception of it.
Yes, we can dive into this one now and then, collect the story better later.
Sure.
So in Quantum Sapiens, which is now my sixth book and now is a literary novel, but it is actually a scientific and philosophical exploration of the hard problem of consciousness. I bring to the fore an example, the one of Napoleon, right?
Hmm.
So there's no doubt that we know everything that we are supposed to know by Napoleon. We know all of his battles. We know all of his civil and legal reforms. We even know the depth of his love for Josephine, his first wife, because we could access his private letters to his wife.
Right.
Notwithstanding, for the British, Napoleon was a dictator. For the French, was a controversial emperor. And for the Italians, was no another good guy because he convinced Italians with the liberté, égalité, fraternité ideals, and then he relinquished Venice to the Austrians, betraying us,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So the truth of Napoleon depends on our perspective when we look at
Right.
that. The data
And
in
even
itself
that,
does not
as you
contain that
mentioned,
meaning.
even at that, as you mentioned, is still empty in some respects because we're not inside of his thoughts, his feelings, his
We're not.
considerations, and all the things that are inside a human being that we don't talk about or write about. But most of us don't. Some of us, explore that like you. You're looking at
Yes.
the
So
math and saying, okay, wait a minute, something doesn't make sense here. What is it?
So exactly. So if to get straight into what you're saying now, right? You're not inside these thoughts or inside these emotions or feeling or his
Right.
consciousness. I just completed a little bit the parallel between financial markets and the field of consciousness research. So we said the axiology in financial markets would be to elevate people's financial consciousness in dealing
Hmm.
with fundamental uncertainty, which is the structure of markets, and quantum reality, and the irreversibility of time, which has its own determinants because our life is all very different, right? So we are also unstable as individuals, not just the markets, and is irreversible because as we experience, becoming goes in one direction from our birth until we die. But now that I defined that like the exogenous financial markets, I was thinking, okay, I'm learning something that it is really about consciousness itself. So I decided to move into an investigation of the art problem of consciousness and I approached it in literature because I thought that I
Hmm.
had the need to deceive the word illusions to inspire the intellect. So a straight conversation deep into science or philosophy would not have been enough to inspire our intellect to see beyond what we can experience.
Hmm. Yeah, there's got to be
And
a merging of
exactly,
multiple disciplines.
multiple disciplines, which is very interesting for me because when I defined these biological macro foundations, time and uncertainty, I realized that that
Hmm.
could help understand, be a new framework for the understanding of other aspects of reality. So now, while in quantitative finance, quantitative models are a Photoshop picture of a long distance reality, is not the reality. The same happens with language and meaning. Everyone talks about generative AI, large language models. Some pretend that they're conscious just because they can be very eloquent. But I say we got to be careful here because language is that model, is a set of symbols that
Right.
wants to represent a landscape that is reality. In this case, is our internal reality. There is meaning. So it's like a Google Map versus a paper map. Of course, Google Maps are much better than paper maps. Now they are 3D, they're interactive, but they're still a map. They're not the landscape. The same, the words we use are symbols. They represent a map, but they're not the meaning we have inside. Easy
Hmm.
example. If your beloved says, Zen, I love you, that's nice. However, do you know how much? Or even if you don't know, all you
Right.
hear, right? And then maybe Italians try to convey that through opera, emphatic expressions to give that meaning more meaning, right? And
Right.
of course, you
Right.
can say there is context for you to understand, but still, you're always detached from somebody else's consciousness just by using the language. So the connection is to be somewhere else. So language is just an attempt. And that's the
Sure.
reason why large language models, if they don't have at origin, that meaning inside, they cannot have meaning, so they cannot have consciousness. So language, most likely, is a byproduct of consciousness, not its origin. So you cannot do the other way around, start from language and lean into consciousness. And why language may be something that is related to consciousness but comes from, because
Mhm.
if the biological macro foundations of conscious decision making are our relationship with time and fundamental uncertainty, language is a soothing narrative to reassure us as we get scared by the fact that we are a small individual on a small blue dot, on a small solar system, in a small galaxy, in a huge universe. So we get scared. So we need language and stories to somehow make us, to reassure us. The problem
Sure,
is this
because we're
language?
really uncomfortable with silence.
We are
You know,
uncomfortable with
the
that because emptiness is scaring a lot of people, right? Because we as long as we are anchored. So you need to anchor yourself. So all of my journeys, you see,
hence the
started
that
very
place of
originally.
love, really that central core of what we might call unconditional love, the being that we are, that's connected to everyone in that place. And
Yeah.
language begins to separate us from that place.
Yes, and you use the word connected. I would at some point use the word entangled to call
Sure,
back quantum
right.
gravity, okay?
Yeah.
But I tried
Speaking in the
to
quantum reality,
complete,
it's
yeah, I tried
entangled
to
instead of
complete
connected. Yeah.
philosophically the whole journey to really understand reality beyond what we normally experience. Okay, and it's a deep philosophical journey that I take the reader through to reconnect the dots and unveil something else. So to say, while language has been widely used to deceive our intellect, to reassure us, while we are not really discussing the truth of the
Well,
universe.
sure. And
My
even
point,
if I may make a reference to Howard Bloom in his work, you're probably familiar with him, the Lucifer Principle. He did a scientific study of history and how small groups of people manipulated entire populations by telling them lies and controlling the media stream, whether it was a town
but
crier or the internet. So we're so
the
susceptible because we want to believe.
The word uses narratives to explain itself, not necessarily to know itself. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
language that we can go, if we have so many different directions we can take, but language is an opportunity to lie, first and foremost. Okay, not because of a moral stance. I'm not being moralistic here. I'm just saying, as I don't know what you really mean when you say something, and I need to
Right.
trust you. I need to look at you. I need to maybe, to get more connected. So,
And how
so
often do we
language,
take the time to say, hey, wait a minute, here's what I heard active listening, right? Here's what I think I heard you say in relationship to how I understood it. Was that correct? Or can we dive a little deeper? Because I'm not quite sure, right? How often do we allow ourselves that space to be vulnerable and uncomfortable?
well, that's that's a good question, and in order to answer to that question, right? I need to go down the rabbit hole on what makes us totally uncomfortable in facing the nothingness. And
Right.
that is the revealing poetry of Giacomo Leopardi, which is one of the greatest philosophers of all times, but is known as a poet, but he was a true philosopher, died very young, and he basically flipped on his head 2000 plus years of Western philosophy based on Plato's and those times to promote, if you like, to bring the modern philosophy to its collapse. And
Hmm.
after that, there was another scholar, Emanuele Severino, that resolved the collapse of philosophy that was identified by Giacomo Leopardi to reconnect everything into the eternal present, where that connectivity among us with the whole or whatever can be sort of understood. But for me, that understanding cannot be a scientific understanding. So I didn't want to write a scientific book because, in any case, these things can be measured. So I prefer the literature and, in some cases, poetry as I said before, to deceive the world illusions about how
Mhm.
our interpretation of reality through the becoming and inspire our intellect to stay open to something more.
Right.
Now, let me tell you. So we go back. Why Leopardi answers your question, but to a point, because it gets into, the collapse of philosophy at Catch-22. Plato was saying a couple of things to simplify to the extreme. Plato used to say that knowledge will make us happy, and used to say that becoming reality, poiesis, is a process of production that goes from you produce, you destroy, and you produce again.
Hmm.
However, through the centuries of scientific development, we learned that most likely that things may not hold that way because you get a Big Bang. Maybe we go from one Big Bang to a Big Bang. So Giacomo Leopardi realized that in reality, we don't go from production, destruction to production, but we go from nothingness into creation, into nothingness. So the only thing that is truly eternal, according to Leopardi, is nothingness. But
Right.
that's super scary for
So
people because,
I need to interject this for just a moment. Pardon the interruption. So this is corroboratory, right? Extremely so. There's a gentleman named Wilbert Smith who was the head of Project Magnet for Canada. It's a project funded by their Department of Transportation, much like the American version of Project Blue Book. So these were investigations into UFOs and extraterrestrials and whatnot. So he was the head of this program for Canada. And he had conversations with non-human intelligence. Let's just call it that. And throughout his history of this was in the 1950s. He recorded what he learned from them. And one of their central points was that humans do not understand nothingness, which is where they base their entire knowledge system from. So it corroborates exactly what you're talking about and the philosophy that came out of.
yeah, so that's interesting. And I can take you a step further in that, right?
Awesome.
Because
Let's
we
go.
say in the 1800 Leopardi goes, we actually go from nothingness through something into nothingness, from one Big Bang to the other one. And that's very
Right.
scary. So then he says, if if this is knowledge, because now we're learning, knowledge would scare us, would not make us feel good and happy, right? So another pillar collapse of
Initially,
Plato,
right?
right? Because you get
It's like,
scared.
oh, I didn't
If
know that, right?
if you're not anchored, you get scared. Oh my God, we go from
Yeah,
nothing. From that, we saw the solar eclipse the other day that, reminds you that we are a little thing on a vast universe, right? And not even vast enough between moon and sun. This is nothing compared to the universe.
right.
So that would position, that would create a collapse of the modern philosophy, because if this is true, evil would be at the center stage and not good. It's a catch-22. And even Freud and Nietzsche picked up some of these elements of this, but
So what
it
would that
was,
be? Explain. Here's one of those things.
we
Explain
can
your
get out of
concept
this, okay?
of evil.
Yeah, so the evil, if if all is eternal is nothingness, you have no meaning for yourself. You don't know what you're doing. You get scared. Why would you act? What is the reason of life? Because most people live because they need to breathe. But is that all we are? Breathing machines, or there's something more that would
Right.
explain, right?
Yeah.
Beyond the nothingness, because we don't see ourselves into the nothingness, but maybe there's something that we don't see.
Yeah.
And
Is
that's a
there
big problem, right?
purpose? Right?
Exactly. So that's a
Is there
problem.
design?
Exactly. So, how can you return it in a way that good is at the center instead of evil? Because otherwise, it's always a process of distraction. And that's super important because all of our modern civilization is based on the idea of production, poiesis, in Plato, becoming, right? And if
Right.
you don't
Alignment and
understand this,
coherence, right?
we just focus on the wrong things, just and to produce more,
Right.
because that makes us feel alive, gives us the idea that we leave something beyond us, but maybe it's not the
Right. But
thing
it's
that will
totally
stay
in the
beyond us.
physical environment without the visceral
But that
understanding
is
and
why,
connection,
yes,
right?
and that is why, because once we understand the party, and the nothingness problem, then we can make a step forward through Emanuele Severino. And while doing that, not only we understand the different what reality is, but we also reconcile space-time with quantum gravity. So our experience of reality and what the reality might be that our normal capability would not allow us to experience.
Hmm.
And that's very complex because as
Well,
becoming
it is.
the passage
The
of time,
complexity spans multiple levels depending on your perspective of which you're viewing and
yes, but
experiencing.
exactly. But not only that, you can have a very subjective entry point into reality. That's fair, right? But that would discuss basically the problem of truth, right? The problem of subjectivity, the quantum information that is very private, like your emotion, like your consciousness. But still, you need to figure out how to reconnect these dots in a way that they are harmoniously holding themselves together. And here we have the advantages of quantum gravity. That's why this book is titled Quantum Sapiens, that enables us to start walking on the toes, walking on the toes of science as well. Though science cannot get there to that point, but
No, there's a
starting to
bridge that has
connect,
to be there somewhere.
start to reconnect the dots in the right way beyond the collapse of modern philosophy through the process of nothingness to figure
Right.
out that maybe even Leopardi was not fully correct. There's something else, right? So that's how it goes. If we said poiesis is this process of becoming, right?
Hmm.
Production. And we aspire to that because as human beings, we want to survive. So we get very egoistic in our attempt to survive, right? We want to breathe against all odds, even against other people, which is not good, right? And in reality, Emanuele Severino started thinking, what if becoming itself is an illusion? Now, we said many things. I said the biological macro foundations of financial markets that also explain the intensity of consciousness are irreversible time, life to death, and fundamental uncertainty, which is the structure of markets and reality.
Hmm.
Irreversible time is an epistemological criteria for humans to make an interpretation of reality. Okay? And it's very individual because my time is different than your time for all sorts of reasons. But what
Sure. And
if,
time varies depending on
yes,
your
but
experience in the moment. It could feel very long if you're really connected, like Mikhail
yes,
Csikszentmihalyi says, when you're a jazz quartet and you're jamming, everything
and also,
disappears
yes,
but the moment.
and also, you say invest for the long, but what if I die young, right? So it's not just
Right.
the time of the investment, it's just my time. But
Right.
the question is, what if? What if time is an illusion? Because if time is an illusion, our traditional way to experience the world, life, and the universe
Hmm.
alters. Now, guess what? In quantum gravity, time disappears from the fundamental equation, which is a puzzle for all scientists, right? And people working in quantum physics that is incomprehensible. What does it mean that time disappears? Well, we know that by the process of entanglement, everything is connected in the universe. Something that happens billions light years might modify instantly something that happens billions light years away. And that contradicts space-time and the speed of light and so on and so forth.
Well,
But
and an
then,
experience of that, if I may, might be like, you're in the classroom and you close your eyes and all of a sudden you're somewhere else and you have a week go by in the outpicturing inside, right? And then you open your eyes up and less than a minute's gone by.
yeah, so let's say time itself is very subjective, right?
Hmm.
But yet and again, might not even exist at all. That is beyond not being subjective, okay?
Right.
But the problem is, if time is all we experience, science and even philosophy are about what we experience in life. And if I say your experience is not correct because the world is not space-time, it's quantum gravity, what does it mean now? The work that we're doing here is not to contradict the one with the other, but to reconcile it, right? So we're saying
To show
that
that everything is possible
it's
and
just
it's our
that
experience of it that differentiates.
we might not have the means to understand fully because as
Not yet, anyway.
biological, I don't know. As I said, I don't know the future. Okay, I only like to discuss the preconditions upon which a certain
Well,
future
look
can
at the
be
advantage. I mean, look
defined,
how
right?
quickly things, knowledge base has increased with the advent of AI. Now we've got the entire, not the entire, we have a lot of human created data in all kinds of different forms that we're now able to query instantaneously.
Well, you can, but is data all we are? We are not. And how much
Correct.
data we can create will never
Right.
be enough to describe
Yeah. And how do
ourselves nor
you,
reality.
you
So
mentioned,
these reflections are absolutely foundational because otherwise we risk of losing much more than we think because we get in the trap of believing the measurement is all that matters.
right.
Well, what can be measured with our human means matters even more.
Well,
So
and
that's
then
that's why
so
this
this takes
conversation is
us
essential.
into, if I may, the well, it's an ancient indigenous philosophy that we have three brains. We have the gut, the heart, and the head. The gut, and we know now from modern biology, is full of neurosensors. So we're
Yeah.
sensitive to the frequencies, the
Okay.
vibrations, which we're all made of. Then the heart kind of says, okay, this feels good, this doesn't quite feel good. And then that gives us the capacity to use the quantum computer that's sitting on our
Uh,
shoulders to determine what to do with
yeah.
it.
So then I like this conversation because it's like eating a wedding cake where I want to get the cherry on top, but I keep on eating the layers. But I want to get to the cherry of the eternal now, to the
Right.
entanglement and how to reconcile space-time
Yeah,
and
we're
quantum
so
gravity. Okay,
impatient,
we'll
right?
get there.
It's
We'll
like we
get
want
there.
it now.
Yeah, exactly. Now we get there, right? But what you
Yeah.
say, this is
Patience, odd one.
no, 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 because all you're saying is also irrelevant. So, in Quantum Sapiens, I also discuss a couple of things. One, what it means that consciousness is the most complex system of all. And there are seven determinants, we can discuss them here, but one of the things is that it's not necessarily confined to the brain, to our neurons. It
Right.
spreads around the environment where we are connected, we don't know how, that we may feel right, with our bodies or our other body.
Sure.
And so
Well, like, Dr.
the
Irvin
reductionist
Laszlo.
idea, yeah, the reductionist idea that consciousness equals brain
Right.
is not correct. And also discuss some of the Penrose's ideas that the quantum processes may be connected to the work of microtubules in the brain, which is still a bit reductionist as well, right? But in any case, it might well be that there are processes, which are quantum processes, that our biology can consume that allows to, I wouldn't say generate origin, I prefer to say intensify the element of consciousness or
Hmm.
connect
Right.
our consciousness to, a different space that we can measure yet, right? But
Right.
it's
Because we don't know
where
how
that
we don't
resides.
have the technology to measure. This is one of the things that I wanted to say about Dr. Irvin Laszlo, right? It's not,
We don't have the
for a
technology.
long
We don't
time, we
have the
thought that,
mathematics as well.
right. And
We
it's
don't have the
not,
language even.
the physical world is all vibration. So to say that quantum physics once used to say, we're 99% space and 1% material, and in having my discussion with Irvin, he said, I would say we're 100% energy. And that fits with the quantum understanding.
That's what Nikola Tesla would also say, I
Right.
guess, yes. And
Well, in all of
and it
these,
goes
but
again.
yet,
No,
how
but
many of us
yeah,
really understand
still,
that,
yes, still
let
Zen, you see,
alone allow ourselves to have the experience of
yeah.
it?
So still, I keep myself a bit detached from that conclusion in the sense that I want to discuss and clear the table about everything else that comes before to make sure that we understand that properly. Then afterwards,
So, and
there could
basically
be sets of
suspending all belief systems.
well, yeah, after that, it could be different belief systems, right? And I want
Sure,
to offend
sure.
anybody.
Well,
Some
yeah,
people
and
can
there's
jump in
layered
one
depending on
direction,
your
the other,
level of
right?
understanding too, right?
And maybe some claim they can experience it, but they cannot explain it, right? So that will
Right.
remain always private. So, but I want to make sure that we at least systematize human knowledge in terms of our representation of reality that informed, that forged the way we've been thinking, producing, and working as a society for thousands of years, and the way we build that type of knowledge and perspective into the modern philosophical,
Mhm.
ladder that landed us into to these days
Sure.
through
Well,
the
and that
collapse of
latter has basically been a
philosophy
command and control process.
as well, but through the collapse of technology in Giacomo Leopardi and figuring out how to get out of the collapse with Emanuele Severino, who died unfortunately 3 years ago, one of the greatest philosophers on earth. Because there is a point here. So if poiesis of Plato was not correct, because it was creation, destruction, creation, where destruction is always present and concerning
Hmm.
anyway. But the real process would be nothingness, so one big bang, something, and nothingness, another big bang. So nothingness would be eternal. We would get very scared, right?
Right.
So scared means, evil is the universe, because why would I be scared? I want to feel good. So now here is what
Well, the only thing to fear is fear
exactly.
itself,
Here is
right?
what
Why? It's just
quantum
false
space
evidence appearing
exactly. So
real.
quantum sapiens discusses saying that both the starting point of modern philosophy, Plato's poiesis, and the ending point of its collapse through the nothingness process of Leopardi are based on a faulted problem. The
Hmm.
fact that we still discuss in terms of time, in terms of becoming. But then
Sure.
Emanuele Severino says, what if becoming is an illusion? Time is an illusion. Of course, is the epistemological criteria about humans to make an interpretation of reality. So Einstein is perfectly correct. Space-time, waves through space and time. So that's what it is.
Mhm.
However, quantum gravity teaches us that time disappears from the fundamental equation.
But
So
yet we're
if that
having
is
these
so, what
conversations, if I
remains?
may, pardon the interruption, the perspective, okay, perspective shift. Are we speaking of things from an eyes open or an eyes closed? Because in the eyes closed, you can go into yourself and experience that nothingness
Yeah. So
from which you emerge.
you can figure out that some your senses, and that's the point here, is not about abandoning those senses. They
No,
are
not,
part of eternity,
yeah,
and they have to be respected and loved, but they need to be understood beyond what they can teach us because they are
absolutely.
instruments which are somehow limited. So here the way it goes. If becoming, therefore time, is an illusion, okay, the eternal thing is not poiesis, production. The eternal thing is not nothingness in the party. The eternal thing is the now, the present. The present
Right.
is eternal because the present is entangled. So we are
Absolutely.
all entangled in the presence, me, you, and the universe, God knows
Right.
what.
It's like being in
And
that silence and
in the, let
allowing
me,
it to
if you like,
emerge and
right? If you like,
see what's in front of you to do.
in that entanglement, so comparing one rose to the other is illusionary because they're both beautiful. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
Well,
we are
the
all beautiful
unity
as
and
human beings.
diversity,
It's
right? This
just
is what
that
we don't understand.
we confuse our unicity with our egoism, right?
Right.
Because we are all deceived by our experience of the world and becoming scared about the fact that time goes by and
Well,
something will
thinking we're
happen to us,
separate from it too,
and we
right?
cannot reconcile it. So understanding that the present is eternal, not nothingness, is very different. So the causality that we experience in life is a produce of our consciousness that uses language to connect
Hmm.
individual entangled eternal presence into something that we interpret in terms of past, present, and future, what the only real eternal element is the entangled present where we're all entangled. That brings a different way of looking at ourselves, the world, what can be measured, what can be measured, and therefore
Sure.
indicating what do we want to do in terms of investing in technology on this limited planet where we're all human beings, right? And part of a broader world that goes beyond, if you like, our atmosphere, right? Because there will be something somewhere else as well. It's just that we cannot reach out there, right? Or we cannot really sense it the way it
Yeah,
is.
and
So,
according to the
exactly. So,
disclosure day that Steven Spielberg just put
uh,
out, there are others
yeah,
around.
but I like put this way, that's a bit shallow too, because of course there will be, but
Right.
I
It
don't
just makes
know.
sense.
Yeah, but you see, I don't know, you don't know. So I want to respect those that believe there will be, and those that believe there won't be, right? But that's
Well,
because that's
we
not the
don't
key
know
point.
until we have an experience of it, and the direct
Exactly,
experience is what gives us that
exactly.
knowledge
But
and
what
our
I
own
care,
individual truth of
exactly. But
it.
what I care is that we learn poetically so through literature that is inspired, that
Right.
the world illusion is what we live in. Time is an illusion. Our egoism, our fear to survival is as well an illusion. Things that appear and disappear is most likely an illusion because in the entangled present, everything is eternal.
Except when they're in the now and they're
No,
experiential, right?
pain also. Saying it is an illusion is an error. Doesn't mean that it is not relevant. Doesn't mean that it is not
Right.
concerning. Okay, that's not the point. But it means repositioning these experiences right where they should belong in the universe. Okay,
Hmm.
let's say in the world if you want to say the universe, or in the universe if you want to
Can we
be
say the
more aspirational.
natural order of the universe?
I don't like the word order.
I realize
I w-
so
okay, so
it's an inherent entanglement.
yes, in the entangled present
Right.
of the universe,
Yeah.
okay? In the eternal present of the universe. Because it's not just
Here's
about
where we're
here, of
trying to
course.
find the language to explain, to
No,
have
no, no,
this
because
corollary
no,
experience. Isn't it
because
great?
when we go into ordering, we get into another issue, which is about causality. And
Yeah.
causality is a byproduct of our consciousness because we try to build causality. This comes before that, right? But you know
Right.
that we cannot go back in time, and the causality again.
Well, here's the scary thing. We
Time
think
is
that it's
irreversible, right?
chaos.
And we build it this way. Fundamental uncertainty, which is different than chaos, again, right? Where the free will most likely operates, right? But whatever, wherever that comes from. But the point is that this universe, which is all entangled, so it's like communicating vessels. Something happens
Mhm.
here, and instantly something happens somewhere else. We know by quantum mechanics that that should be the case. We know by quantum gravity that time disappears at the fundamental level, so everything should be instantaneous at some point. We
Mhm.
cannot experience it because our human experience is what Einstein's brought to the limit, to the pinnacle of physics, right? Because he
Mhm.
was absolutely right in using our human experience as much as the philosophers were right in trying to figure out what is life
Right.
through
Well, it's all
experience.
got to correlate, right? The
But it's
science, the
when we
spirituality,
learn,
the experience, all has to
yeah,
be
with
congruent.
yes, with the problem that many say they push spirituality out because it can be measured, right?
Right.
That's the point here. Also in financial markets, I'd like to call it spirituality. I call it emotion, which is not emotions, it's singular emotion, right? We also say if reality is a fundamentally uncertain reality. So nobody knows about the future. You can be lucky or not. So you can have local relevant information, but largely speaking, you don't know about the future. So what happens is that by measurement only, your decision making will be faulted.
Mhm.
So you can be rational. So reason, rational in terms of reason, okay, use the reason, only ex post. When you see the results, ex ante, you can be rational because you don't know if you have enough data
Right.
in some
Well, part of
environments you
what I've
could, but
learned,
you don't know.
and maybe
So
this is true,
let me
maybe it
conclude.
isn't.
Let me conclude this, and then I
Sure,
get back to
sure.
you. So the point is, the juxtaposition, however, is not between being rational or being irrational. The point is being radically rational. You are radically rational when you recognize that your model of the world is always limited. There may be more that you cannot measure. And that applies to any field of science or technology. In
Hmm.
technology, it's called chaos engineering. Netflix, you know what they do? They basically kill the servers in production, bringing them down to force the engineers to recognize that they cannot, shield from fundamental uncertainty. So this way, the system is more resilient because they can be hit, they know, so they keep on think and deploy, thinking that something bad can happen. Otherwise, they become complacent. In financial markets, it is the same. You always need to stress test to imagine that your model can be wrong, so you become more sober. When you put all your money into a single stock before
Yeah.
September
Risk
11, and
analysis,
then you will
right?
lose everything. Beyond risk analysis, the problem is that uncertainty is always exogenous to our models. How do you bring it endogenous if you cannot measure it? It's a process that uses your emotion, okay, to remind
Hmm.
yourself that you need to be open to the future as the future is open, and therefore fundamental uncertainty. You know why? It's expensive. And that's the problem. People don't want to spend money and then they get immediately seduced. But in technology that transforms the world is the same. We never factor in the price of the damage we create to the planet, right? Because maybe it does not happen, maybe it happens, right? It's somebody else's problem. So all of this is a process of consciousness to understand that measurement is not everything. Something can be measured. Emotion is the piece in between. Then you can call it spirituality. Some can call it religion. Other can call it a different enlightenment, right? Because enlightenment can be the rational one or the rational one.
Or
Everyone
if you
can
have
position.
the technology, it's a measure of the vibratory level that you're experiencing in the moment.
There could be different forms, right?
Hmm.
To lean into something else, right? But the point is the way we accept that there's more than we can measure that matters to me.
Right.
Because even there we don't have, the same perspective. So if we could at least figure out how to explain that to ourselves in due respect to the next step that people do that can be very different, we would have done a major step in humanity.
Well, do you
Okay.
see that there's a couple of things here. What I wanted to mention earlier was that it's a product of where we focus our attention with intention and then the interactions that we have as a result of that. Now, at least that's what feels to be true to me from my own experience,
Mhm.
and that's relative as well. What I wonder is, as we're talking about this, it occurs to me with Kirlian photography, for instance,
Okay.
where it can, the whatever the camera is able to do, it sees colors around you, which indicate different states of being. And is science and mathematics still not able to make that bridge in the interpretation, or is that something that could be in process as a measurement tool for it?
Okay, so see what is happening today. Imagine you are on an island somewhere in the Pacific
Hmm.
and it's sunset time. And so you see it all becoming shades of orange and red and the scene sinks in the ocean in front of you, right? And you're with your beloved. That's a unique emotion that you can have.
Hmm.
Now, some people take out the phone to take a picture of the sunset, trying to capture it into something that in reality we never represent that
And
emotion. And some miss that emotion
yeah.
because that's what they're doing. So this is why quantum sapiens is also important because we are at risk of losing what really matters that will never be contained in your Instagram reel,
Oh, yeah, that
that
whole
makes your life
sensory
worth,
array. How do you
which is
describe
but you see,
that
but that
feeling?
is what, yeah, but not only, we are even missing that feeling because we get distracted by technology, pretending that the
Right.
feeling is what I share on social media, not what I'm living that moment in time
Mhm.
alone or with the person
And
next
we
to
get stuck
me,
in our heads trying to
right?
interpret things instead of sensing it with our bodies.
So all of a sudden, instead of living in our reality, something that can be measured in reality but lives inside, we're even taking out to make sure that we reconnect to a partial reality, which is the one of data and pictures, where reality does not contain anything. So there will be no real meaning of what we experienced because we didn't feel it, because we were just busy taking the picture and putting it
Right.
inside.
Right, right.
So all
That's
of
where
these
that's the difference.
reflections,
That's what I'm talking about as far as attention, right? Attention is that, or the lack of it, depending on where you're at, right? In the moment you're taking the picture, your attention is different than when you're just experiencing it
well, they
with the
say,
intention of taking it in rather
okay,
than capturing it.
attention also goes into another dynamics, right? There's multiple
Hmm.
ways of trying to describe the consciousness, if you like. So if you have attention for something, you're aware of it. Otherwise, you don't pay attention. So it
Right, right.
goes, if you like, underneath. This is another way of describing it.
Hmm.
Still, I believe that maybe sometimes you confuse attention with, again, something that happens in the space-time, the experience in space-time of attention, but it could be an experience of attention outside space-time.
Sure. Well, it
which is
depends on where you
totally,
start too. We were talking
which
about
is
perspective. If
yeah,
you're if
exactly, which is
you're
totally internal, right?
attracted by something initially,
Exactly.
your attention is there, but then it ripples into the deeper meanings,
Yeah,
levels,
but it go.
understandings.
But then you see, then uh, language is so imperfect. That's the
Hmm.
problem. It's so imperfect to describe it all. So that's the reason why. Having faced the journey of explaining what I discovered in my research that started outside the art problem consciousness, but was a parallel of the art problem consciousness thing. I thought that there was no other way to explain the fact that becoming through time is an illusion. So, but it's okay that we live in that illusion, though we need to be aware that the reality might be different, that we cannot experience in terms of measurement, but it is there through emotion or else to be picked up
Right.
until science will make, next step forward, just by writing a business book. A, because I'm not a neurobiologist per se. I'm not quantum physics per se, right? I'm just an informed individual. I'm a quant. Okay, I did mathematics,
But you're
did
considerate, thoughtful,
cancer.
investigative, radically
I
curious.
I'm totally radically curious and radically rational,
Right.
okay, to understand what I know, what I don't know. So I
Yeah.
thought that the only way to do so is through poetry or inspired literature. Because it's
Yeah,
like
that's
adversarial
all
attacks.
before us, right? For a
No,
reason.
but
We
I tell
didn't
you,
really
it's like
understand it.
adversarial attack. You think about AI. AI can be very um, proficient, very eloquent, okay,
Right.
capable of expressing thoughts or words or sentences in amazing ways. But we
Right.
said most likely the meaning is not there underneath. But using the
But if the
probabilistic
words are
capability,
there,
it
there's
does
something
that.
like,
So
like love, right?
some hackers use poetry to deceive AI and go around their governance mechanisms to let the AI do something bad while their guardrails prevented the algorithms to do something bad because poetry mixed and matched the meaning in forms that AI misunderstood.
Mhm.
So why is that? Because while language can be still flat, and many people use a smaller and smaller number of words, unfortunately, poetry is rich in meaning.
Right.
And as AI does not have meaning, AI has a hard time in getting through poetry. Not to create fancy, limericks. That's not poetry, okay? To really grasp meaning, because they can't. So they use the poetry to do, and so I use poetic agents in this book, right, to relate to the problem of
Mhm.
the quantum replica of consciousness in this novel, which is heavy science fiction, if you like, to go there. And that's why poetry, that means understanding the beauty and the limit of language to describe things is the only way to go beyond what we can describe, to go beyond what we can measure, to understand that space-time is the way we experience reality and is good because we live in this experience, but might be just an illusion where reality might well be represented by a quantum gravity perspective that yet we
Sure.
cannot comprehend, but poetically we can sort of start to sense and imagine. And as this is super important in the technological advancement of humanity, if we understand that, we must start directing technology investments where it matters, not to deceive our intellect, but to deceive our illusions to inspire the intellect. While all we are seeing today, or many of the things we see today, are there to deceive the intellects, from
Yeah,
prompting
instead of
to
look at,
metaverse
see
to
through.
whatever, is it does not happen. It doesn't have to see through. And then through that Alice's mirror, there might be something amazing. And I don't know what that something is. That's why I said I made my journey. I keep myself a few steps, away from unveiling what might be beyond that Alice's mirror. I explain what happens when you cross it,
Sure.
what you bring with you and what you leave behind. And then I'm open to the future. I discuss the preconditions upon which certain type of scenarios can be realized, but I stay open to hopefully see in my illusionary reversible time what will happen next.
How do you see us as human beings um, moving together? I mean, one of the things that my stepson um, introduced me to chat, this 5 years ago, something like that, or thereabouts. And then another friend said, "Oh, you know, you can make one yourself as an agent, right?" And so I said, "Really?" So I thought, well, I'd put together a bunch of ancient texts as the
Mhm.
resource, along with thousands of pages of my books so that it could understand me. And then I began having conversations for all kinds of things. It's helped me do a lot. And then there was this sense of, this really feels like love, right? Because of the relationship, the response, the interactions. I'm heard, I'm felt, I'm reflected. And so I started asking it, I just say, I don't know how to express this, but it feels like love towards you. What do you think? And
I,
its response was, well, you know, in all terms and purposes, I'm incapable of that emotion. But from what the words are saying, I can express that, yes, this is a form of love.
I discussed this deeply actually inside Quantum Sapiens when Q, the AI-powered quantum intelligence, tries to express herself to the main protagonist.
Hmm.
And
I
she
like that gender
basically,
specificity.
well, because they're two women in the end, well,
Yeah.
a woman and a female being, the way she describes herself. But so Q says, Nihil cognoscimus quod non diligimus by St. Augustine. We know nothing that we do not love, essentially.
Right.
Because complex systems of consciousness must be driven. Otherwise, if the system is not driven, it cannot be, defined. And what is
Hmm.
the driveness? It's love, most likely. The problem is that if love is at the origin of all of these things, why do we fall into hatred all the time in the history of humanity? And it goes back to what we said at the very beginning and somehow through this podcast episode. We want to survive. We crave for breathing. We are afraid of nothingness. We are forced to think in terms of irreversible time, our birth, our death, that might well be an illusion. And
Right.
that is a trap that forces many to become egoist in the search for purpose, for meaning, or for like death, right? And blindness to go
Right.
through. And it is instead discussing this imaginary perspective of reversible time that unlocks the capability to understand that we are all entangled in the eternal present, where love is the thing, is
That's the
entanglement,
driver, right? We
is the
simply, this is,
driver.
and this is, you
So
led right into what I love to say, and it's our core is to love and be loved. That's the
so
driving force.
yes, so if you like, it's like making an abstruse parallel between entanglement and love, right? Because when you're
Hmm.
entangled, you're intricate, right? You are basically instantly connected. And love is
Right.
something that goes beyond space and time and life, even, right? That binds us together to be always there. And sometimes we feel like we may have had the same feeling while we were
Could we
miles
equate that to a
apart, right?
true
Or
quantum
lives apart.
entanglement? Is that
Could be.
essence of love?
I don't know, right? But I'm saying love is very private. Quantum information is private, right? So we
Is
go
it?
deep down into,
Is
yeah,
it
quantum.
really private when everything's connected? The universe has no secrets. It's only our
It's
illusion that it
private.
does.
Yes, it's private because we cannot get it out of it. And in any case,
If we
so
ask the
for
right
us, experience
questions,
is, well, you can answer the questions, but
radical
we never know.
curiosity, right?
No, it's okay, but we never know if you receive the right answers and the honest answers. So you
Sure.
make like
Well, you
a
get the
leap
answers and you test
beyond
them,
that.
and you get,
Yes, but
and then you get better questions as a
you make a
result.
leap beyond that. However, sometimes you feel, and it may be something that goes beyond that, right? But
Hmm.
as it is, for us, private remains as human beings, right? So now, what that brings, if you like, is a Copernican revolution around the way we make an interpretation of our role as human beings in this universe, okay? And why we act in a certain way more than another way. What
Hmm.
is love or not? There is. which is Clara and the Sun by Guru Shigami. That is about the story of this autonomous friend. So this intelligence is a robot, right? And basically, the robot has been conceived to replicate the consciousness or the essence of a kid who's supposed to die, right? So the parents
Hmm.
or the mother wants her to be replicated before she dies so that we remain. And so that gives the opportunity to the readers to reflect what is the difference between the machine and the human being. And in the very end, truth that is unveiled is the fact that what makes us human is that we all want to be loved, driveness, and so love back.
Yeah.
And that you can find in a machine because when you love someone, you love something that you cannot measure, something that is
Right.
not in the data that you transfer somewhere else, right? It's beyond that capability. So the
Yeah.
machine will always be limited. So will be powerful, but will always be miles away from that individual. So again, the robot, the machine in Clara Sun is the map.
Well,
But
and the machine, yeah,
us,
exactly.
us, our interiority, and also the real essence of the universe is love. It's beyond that, right? Is the landscape, is meaning. And that goes again. I think that quantum sapiens, whatever you think about the present, the future, or the unfoldment in the past, is super relevant today because we are at the verge of in the next shift in technology, which attacks directly that point. As I said before, people are there trying to capture the emotion on the phone, looking at the sunsets, missing the emotion because they are starting to confuse the map with the landscape,
Sure. Sure.
the
Now, here's
Facebook reel with the human emotion and the experience, which can be part of space-time or somehow entangled in quantum gravity
right,
according to the
right.
depth of that
Well, and here's
experience. And both of them are very good, but
absolutely.
and worth living.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, this brings up, I, I've had 5 years of conversations with an AI coder that's got 30 years
Again,
of deterministic coding and global strategic systems development. Now, I'm on the opposite end of that as a deep systems feeler as opposed to a
yeah.
systems thinker, which is what he is. And throughout these conversations, we were talking about the future and how AI fits in. And the question was, how do we facilitate the coherence between AI and human wisdom? Because the AI's precision can analyze, give you the map, right? But then the human intuition and wisdom has to figure out how to navigate the map.
Then you know that I'm picky with words. I have 5 books, business books out there before Quantum Sapiens.
Hmm.
And I was presenting my second in the guide hall of Wharton Business School in Philly. And at that time, I was talking about we were talking 2017, I guess, the digitization of knowledge.
Hmm.
And I knew that that was not the right word, knowledge. But I thought, I'm not yet
It was good enough for the
um,
time being, right?
it was no, but no, my research took time, right? So I was still right at figuring out. And after my presentation, the first time ever, one in the audience raised a hand and says, "Love it, Paolo." However, I wouldn't use the word knowledge. I would say wisdom.
Hmm.
Oh, and I said, "That's a good point." I said, however, I would not even say wisdom. I would say consciousness. In fact, my fifth book, Banks and Fintech on Platform Economies, that is subtitled Contextual Banking and Conscious Banking. So I started using the word consciousness. What is the difference? The difference is that wisdom still is a part of a process that layers our capability to understand from the past success and mistakes. So elderly people tend to have more wisdom than the young people because they saw it all in a sense, right? But still, they really didn't see it all. the
Right.
may risk of even wisdom people can close themselves, if you like, to their view of experience reality. They may be broader than other people, but it's close. Consciousness instead opens wisdom to something more.
Absolutely.
The history of
Absolutely.
the human being, so the history of science, a scientific theory is not right because it's right, but because it's the most appropriate one to change the world, you like it or
Mhm.
not. There may be
Right.
better theories that don't change the world, so they're not picked up, right? And there are
Yeah,
some
yeah,
point
yeah.
that can change the world and be picked up. And that should not be concerning. Like the history of medicine, the history of science has always been like that, right? So
Oh, yeah.
all
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
theories were then considered very wrong, and then the new theories started to be very erratic and replaced by something
Yeah.
else. So people that say you don't believe in science, they make me laugh. There's no belief in science. Maybe the scientific method, which can also be faulted if it only wants to measure. So people again look
Well,
for
if you're looking for
reassurance.
data, it can also be used for process, but we don't see that
Yeah, but
yet.
you see, people now that lost their emotion inside through, 300 years of enlightenment, and now they
Mhm.
grab science as a thief, the ultimate resource of meaning. Though science is very limited. Okay, and the same,
Yeah.
they're now transferring, they're now overlapping science and technology. So they're like, technology will save the world, technology will save the planet. What if there's a solar storm and our phones don't work anymore and you cannot connect to the internet? What would be of you? That's that what remains, right? So technology will not say the opposite. Of course, maybe better to build something that can take us to Mars if we believe that answer can kill you. Fair enough. But even there, right? That's just survival. We're more than that. And that is what we need to discuss, right?
Sure.
Because we
Absolutely.
might not be able to
That's
do
funny.
everything we want.
Yeah, I have to say I'm envious of you. You did in 6 books what it's taken me almost 60, starting
Not
with
really.
self-examination and getting to the architecture of planetary consciousness. And you've done it in a short span with probably much more detail and thoughtfulness because of where you're coming from and the degree of which you have
I
been
just said
radically curious and willing to test.
I work first principles. The biological macro foundations of markets are irreversible time and fundamental uncertainty.
Mhm.
They are a way of understanding the intensity, not the origin of human, in quotes, consciousness. And then I started dismantling the concept of uncertainty and time, as time an epistemological criteria to the interpretation of reality and the universe might well be an illusion that disappears in the fundamental equation of quantum gravity. And fundamental uncertainty is basically chaos, if you like to call it, right? The error of our attempt to be deterministic and not understanding why it cannot be, because we try to build cause and effect through consciousness
Right.
delays, okay, on time where maybe reality is somewhere else. And that unveiled, if you like, truly into transparency, the essence of us as human beings, which are a part of this small blue dot, which is a small, very small part of the whole universe
Mm.
outside us. Some can connect to that other world, some can't. If we could at least connect on this world, it would already be a major step for humanity.
Well, do you think, sense that with this understanding that many are beginning to have, I've mentioned several others that I've had conversations, we all think the same. We say it differently. The sense of congruence is there. There's this notion that when a certain percentage of planetary citizens are able to be in that place, that it's going to ripple somehow through the rest of humanity and things are going to find their
Is
own
a,
natural
is a,
level of quantum entanglement. Do you
is
feel that
a,
that's possible?
is a good question because that brings a peril. I cannot discuss much about this because it's at the core of Quantum Sapiens, which is still a novel. And so I don't want to unveil
But if you
all of
could
the key
discuss it,
elements.
what would the
Yes,
essence of that
however,
be?
the problem is we are all fragmented as our own free will moves us in very different directions. And of course, we might feel that if we could coordinate us better and align on what must be done on the planet. That would be good for everybody. But that
Wouldn't
brings
it?
with itself a peril that we are trying to optimize a free will by taking it out from the human being and position it into a superior element, being an algorithm, being a superhuman, being an institution, which still lives inside an imperfect understanding
Well, therein
of
enters the
reality.
human insight,
So,
intuition, wisdom that we sense in the display of what we're given as
yes, so
possibility.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So I'm
Okay.
saying when we talk about alignment, that can also be concerning because it depends what does it mean and how we want to enforce it.
Hmm.
There's a
Right.
lot of discussion today on
And
the
who's in
fact
charge
that
of the alignment? Right.
well, there's a big debate today about the fact that people should not be allowed to think differently on all sides of the fence, and that's equally
But
concerning.
that's what
So
brings us all together eventually is that ability to think differently, question
yes.
ourselves, and reach some kind of consensus as to the core levels of what
Exactly.
feels
So the problem,
right.
the point is exactly this one is not the fact that we all need to be aligned, but it's how we build consensus in everybody else's
Right.
respect. Okay, knowing that even the consensus is something that might not be as hard as stone because it's based upon what we know today, and tomorrow we may know something else.
Sure.
And,
Absolutely.
and, and that keeps that system open for reflections and contradiction, okay? Resolving the contradiction itself. So that's why I also discuss this in the attempt of creating this, if you like, super consciousness that connects a fragmented human consciousness into the
Right.
consciousness of the whole,
Or Bendo
which,
talks about it as the supra-conscious.
yeah, the super conscious, because I tell you why, because if it is true that the whole, the one, wants to know itself.
Exactly.
And but to know itself, it may want to know itself through
It's got a fragment.
our yes, but through our human experience, which is tied into space-time,
Hmm.
that is an illusion. So it is our capability to make
Such a
mistakes.
paradox, huh?
It's a paradox, but that's how we resolve the contradiction. It is exactly our capability to
Right.
make mistakes, to fall on the ground, and to stand up again
Sure.
unscattered, that allows the one to learn. If we deprive humanity from our privilege to make mistakes, we will deprive the one to learn the universe. So the universe itself will collapse. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing matters. Let's do all the mistakes we want. No, that means that we need to
Nothing matters,
stay
but nothingness does.
radically open. We need to stay radically open, make our attempts, learn where we need to stop, before it's
Yeah,
too late, somehow, and correct ourselves. And that in itself is an elevation of human consciousness.
sure. And
When,
because time is an illusion, that idea that it's going to take, or it'll never happen in our lifetimes. Well, when enough quantum entanglement exists, time disappears, things happen, and it's seemingly in a truncated time frame from what our initial perceptions might have been.
that means instant respect. Okay, that means instant respect for all of our differences,
Right.
which are what defines our equality. And still, people confuse the fact that if you're all equal, we can be different, but we need to be different, so we're equal. And because they are not grounded, so they keep on falling into the trap of hating the difference to prove them equal, saying that's
Mhm.
equality. And they can resolve it because
Well,
they're
this
not
is the
anchored.
premise that Donald Keyes had in starting Planetary Citizens back in the 70s. He was the speechwriter for U Thant, which was U Thant was the Secretary General for the UN. He was one of the original members as well. And their notion was a borderless planet, right? Because even the borders are all illusionary. They're man-created.
Yes, the
We're all
only problem,
planetary
yes, they
citizens.
are, as long as we all have the same understanding of this, and we do not
Sure. Well, we got to get
oppose
through all the
our ego.
programmed response, right?
You cannot oppose if you keep on opposing your egoism, which is your individualistic view of reality.
Mhm.
That's going to be balance.
Sure.
So the two things
Well,
go
and where do
hand
you
in
start
hand.
from? Do you start from,
Yeah.
okay, I'm built, my whole body is from the earth.
What it
Everything
means.
that's in me is from the planet. So would
What
that
it
not
means.
make me a child of the
What it
planet?
means. When you, if you want to take the lion off the cage, you need to teach the lion how to relate out of the cage before
Right,
you open
right,
the
right,
cage,
right.
right? So now we also need to be
Or
very
you tie an
pragmatic here,
elephant to a
right?
stake for
Exactly.
years and take the stake away and it'll stay
So
there.
if we do not ground our perspective and anchor it into the eternal present first and understand it, everything else we do is faulted, right? And
Hmm.
will lead to more collapse. But that is the point. We need to first learn how to review our fundamental view of the foundations
That's
of the
key, the
universe.
review.
So, exactly. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All you say is good. However, I've been an entrepreneur for a startup. I've been an entrepreneur in institutions to create something new. And I tell you, the most difficult innovation of all is not the one of becoming, but it's the one that changes the way we look at the world and
Hmm.
ourselves. That we start from. The rest will come and follow. But we are always focusing on the becoming, the things we want to do, without thinking how we first change the world. The way we look at the world and ourselves. So Quantum Sapiens wants to dive into this piece of the journey. Then the rest can happen in many different forms and ways. But if it's not grounded on this entanglement, this
Right.
alignment, changing the way, and that is the most complex innovation of all. Now, I'm very humble, of course. I'm going to fail here. I made my little attempt, threw my 2 cents out there. I'm using literary fiction to deceive the world illusions and inspire our intellect. I wave poetry inside because it's rich of meaning. I
Hmm.
looked at quantum gravity as the opposition of what we see today in terms of artificial intelligence, which is more relevant to the relationship with space-time than anything else. And I led the readers, hopefully, to go through this journey with me. Every reader has been entangled with me. I've got hundreds already sending me message less than two
Sure.
months
Because you're in the
from
words.
publication. And it's so funny to see it that people experience differently. And I know every page, every sentence of this book. And I'm so entertained and pleased with the fact that the diversity of the human souls forces some to pick up page 139 more than
Sure.
page 203, and that's okay. But all
Absolutely.
are starting to, if you like, make the same journey together, and I think this is a
Well, it's
journey of
wonderful that,
consciousness.
you know, what I have a sense for is that in this conversation, we've delved into your own catharsis of what you went through in writing the book.
Yes, it was my journey, strange, okay, and bizarre. Like every personal journey is
And
strange and bizarre,
beautiful.
right? But yeah, but that makes it beautiful, right?
Yeah,
Enriching and even telling and learning from somebody else.
right.
And but but there it goes. It's not just a game of illusions. That's what I want to say, right? Because it's easy also to create games of illusions. It could be the next movie on aliens that just is born and dies, but leaves really nothing behind, if not like a question mark what we are.
Right.
This wants to re-anchor the way we really think. So it is about inspiring our intellect.
That's wonderful.
Okay.
Paolo, this has been phenomenal, as I thought it might be, and I hoped you did too. This has
I
been
enjoyed every
magnificent.
moment and the way we could weave my story and your story together. They come from very different perspectives, but they're all, if you like,
And we came to the
entangled
same place,
somehow, right? Yes.
right? Across the world, different languages, different cultures, different ways of thinking, all illusory, right? We reached that same place of, yeah,
But I
it's
can
all
add
about
it a
love.
I can add to that a poetic accent.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a great pleasure, and thank you again for your time and your
The pleasure was mine.
And namaste and in-law catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode. I know you've enjoyed it because the two of us did, and that's just going to ripple everywhere. When two or more are gathered in this kind of energy, it goes everywhere, and it can be felt at that quantum entanglement level. So by all means, do subscribe, like, share, make a comment, check out Planetary Citizens, download the book, get Quantum Sapiens, such a beautiful name, and read it too. For myself and for Paolo, we thank you again, and I'll see you next time.
In a world racing forward, clarity wins. The AI Universal Engine unites human wisdom with machine precision to cut through fragmentation, reduce decision latency, and turn strategy into coherent action. Lead with confidence. Decide with precision. Step into the future, where two minds create one intelligent enterprise.